I stood paralyzed in my kitchen as my mother's voice came through the phone, explaining why my children couldn't come to Easter dinner. "We just love your sister's kids more, you understand." Their Easter baskets already arranged on the dining table, where my children's photos once sat. My mother's voice came through the phone with that particular tone she used when delivering what she considered reasonable pronouncements, firm, slightly elevated, with the cadence of someone explaining simple concepts to a person who should already understand them. "Rebecca, about Easter Sunday. We've decided it would be best if you and Mark came alone this year. Without the children." I paused in the middle of folding laundry, my daughter Emma's favorite purple sweater still in my hands. The statement was so unexpected that for a moment, I wondered if I'd misheard. "You don't want the kids to come to Easter?" I clarified, keeping my voice neutral despite the immediate knot forming in my stomach. "They've been looking forward to the egg hunt. Ethan's been talking about it all week." "That's the thing," my mother continued, her tone now shifting to practiced sympathy that never quite reached sincerity. "The egg hunt will really be more appropriate for Melissa's children this year. Tyler is old enough to understand the clues Carol has prepared, and Madison is at such a precious age for these traditions." I sat down at the kitchen table, the laundry forgotten. "Mom, Ethan is 9, a year older than Tyler. And Emma is 6, the same age as Madison. How exactly are the egg hunt clues less appropriate for my children?" There was a brief silence. Then my mother sighed with the familiar sound of someone being forced to state an uncomfortable truth. "Rebecca, you know we love all our grandchildren, but there's no point pretending we don't have a special bond with Tyler and Madison. We simply enjoy their company more. They're more well-behaved, more engaging. Melissa has raised them to appreciate family traditions in a way that your children just haven't learned." The words hit with physical force, the casual cruelty stealing my breath for a moment. Not a pretense of scheduling conflicts. Not an invented excuse about space limitations or age-appropriate activities. Just the raw, unvarnished statement that my parents loved my sister's children more than mine. "You're uninviting my children from Easter because you prefer Melissa's kids," I repeated, wanting to hear her confirm what seemed unbelievable despite years of evidence. "Now don't get dramatic," my mother said, irritation edging into her voice. "Nobody is uninviting anyone. We're simply adjusting the guest list to make the day more enjoyable for everyone. You and Mark are still welcome, of course." The casual dismissal of my children as unwanted additions rather than family members worthy of celebration and tradition ignited something beyond the hurt I'd normally feel. A cold clarity began replacing the emotional response, my mind cataloging this conversation within the pattern I'd observed but excused for years. "I see," I replied, my voice steady despite the churning emotions beneath. "And does Melissa know about this adjustment to the guest list?" "Of course," my mother said, relief evident in her tone now that the difficult part of the conversation seemed past. "She agreed it would be more comfortable for everyone this way. The children won't even have to split the Easter presents." Of course Melissa knew. Of course she'd agreed. The sister who had cultivated her position as the favored daughter with the precision of a master gardener, ensuring her children received the preferential treatment she'd always enjoyed. "I need to go, Mom. Ethan will be home from school soon," I said, maintaining composure rather than engaging further. "So we'll see you and Mark on Sunday? Around 2. The expectation clear in her voice, that I would comply as I always had, accepting the scraps of family inclusion offered while my children were pushed aside. "I'll talk to Mark and let you know," I replied noncommittally before ending the call. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folded laundry, the purple sweater Emma had worn to school that morning now seeming like a rebuke. How many times had my parents missed her school performances while attending every one of Madison's? How many of Ethan's soccer games had they skipped while cheering on Tyler each weekend? The pattern had been there all along: birthday gifts of dramatically different values, Christmas stockings with obvious disparities, vacation invitations extended to my sister's family while mine received brief, obligatory visits. Small inequities I'd rationalized away to maintain family peace, excuses I'd manufactured to protect my children from the truth of their grandparents' favoritism. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Mom told me she spoke with you about Easter. It's really better this way. The kids will have more fun without the extra complication. You understand. Not a question. A statement. The confident assumption that I would continue accepting the unacceptable, maintaining the family dynamic that elevated her children while diminishing mine. Instead of responding, I scrolled through recent family photos, seeing the evidence with newly unclouded eyes. Christmas morning. Tyler opening an iPad while Ethan received a board game. Madison showing off her new American Girl doll collection, while Emma clutched a single discount store doll. The family vacation photos where Melissa's family appeared in every shot, while my children were mentioned as staying home with their parents. Mark found me still at the kitchen table when he arrived home from work, the laundry unfinished, my phone now filled with notes I'd been making, dates, events, specific instances that formed a pattern too consistent to be coincidental. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately sensing the tension. I recounted the conversation verbatim, watching his expression shift from disbelief to anger to the protective determination that made him such an excellent father. "They explicitly said they prefer Melissa's kids over ours," he confirmed, jaw tightening. "And they expect us to show up alone like our children don't matter? They expect me to accept it as reasonable," I clarified. "Like always." The sound of the school bus stopping outside interrupted our conversation. Moments later, Ethan burst through the door, backpack still on, excitement radiating from him. "Mom! Ms. Williams loved my Easter project. She put it on the display wall and everything. Can I bring it to Grandma's on Sunday to show her?" The innocent question pierced straight through my chest. I met Mark's eyes over our son's head, seeing the same pain reflected there. "Hey buddy," Mark said, voice carefully controlled. "How about you go change out of your school clothes? Mom and I need to talk about something." Once Ethan was upstairs, Mark sat across from me, taking my hands in his. "What do you want to do?" The question wasn't about Easter Sunday. It was about everything, the years of subtle favoritism now made explicit, the damage being inflicted on our children's self-worth, the family system that required my compliance to function. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I know we're not going to Easter without the kids, and I'm not subjecting them to grandparents who've explicitly stated they enjoy other children more." "Agreed," Mark said firmly. "And maybe it's time to stop pretending this is normal family dynamics." The bus arrived again, bringing Emma home from kindergarten. She skipped through the door, clutching a paper bag decorated with cotton ball bunnies. "Mommy, I made an Easter basket for Grandma, and I wrote Madison's name on an egg because Miss Thompson said we should make eggs for our cousins." I hugged her tightly, inhaling the scent of school glue and crayons that clung to her hair, feeling her small arms wrap trustingly around my neck. In that moment, something shifted inside me, the hurt and shock hardening into resolve. "It's beautiful, sweetie," I told her, meeting Mark's gaze over her head. "Why don't you go wash up for dinner? We're having breakfast for dinner tonight." After the children were occupied with their pre-dinner routine, I turned to Mark. "I need to call my mother back. And then Melissa." Mark nodded. "What are you going to say?" "The truth. That we won't be attending Easter without our children. That explicit favoritism is unacceptable. And that it's time for some changes in how this family operates." My mother answered on the third ring, her voice immediately taking on the patient tone she used when expecting me to be difficult. "Rebecca, have you and Mark decided about Sunday?" "Yes," I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. "We won't be attending an event where our children are explicitly unwelcome." "Don't be so sensitive," she scoffed. "Nobody said they're unwelcome. We simply said you enjoy Melissa's children more." I completed for her. "That they're better behaved, more engaging, and more appreciative of family traditions." "Those were your exact words, Mom." The brief silence confirmed she hadn't expected to be quoted back to herself. "Well, it's simply the truth," she finally said, defensiveness replacing patience. "I don't see why stating facts has to create such drama. It's not drama to protect my children from people who view them as lesser," I replied evenly. "Even when those people are their grandparents." After ending the call, I immediately dialed Melissa, determined to complete the confrontation circuit before dinner. She answered with artificial brightness. Rebecca, did you talk to Mom about Easter? It really is best for everyone. I finished. Yes, Mom made your mutual decision quite clear. My children aren't welcome because you both prefer yours. Her tone shifted instantly to the condescending sympathy she'd perfected since childhood. It's not about preference, Rebecca. It's about what makes sense for a harmonious family gathering. My kids just fit better with Mom and Dad's expectations. And you helped cultivate those expectations, I observed, the pattern becoming clearer with each exchange. Just like you agreed it would be better to exclude your niece and nephew from a family holiday. You're overreacting, she dismissed. It's one Easter egg hunt, not a life-changing event. But it wasn't just one egg hunt. It was years of systematic preference, of carefully constructed family mythology about which grandchildren were more worthy of love and attention. And for the first time, I was seeing it with absolute clarity. As I prepared breakfast for dinner, the special occasion meal my children loved, I watched Ethan helping Emma set the table, their innocent excitement about upcoming Easter celebrations still intact. They didn't yet know their grandparents had deemed them less lovable, less valuable than their cousins. A cold, strategic calm settled over me as I flipped pancakes and arranged bacon. This wasn't just about one holiday or one hurtful phone call. This was about a family system that required fundamental restructuring, not through emotional confrontation but through careful, methodical change. My parents had finally stated explicitly what had been implicit for years. And in doing so, they'd inadvertently given me the clarity I needed to address the situation completely. They thought they were simply adjusting a guest list. They didn't realize they were catalyzing a family revolution. After the children were asleep, Mark and I sat at the dining room table, my laptop open between us, a notebook filled with increasingly detailed notes beside it. What had begun as emotional processing had evolved into methodical documentation. Dates, events, patterns too consistent to be coincidental, too deliberate to be accidental. I think we need to be systematic about this, I explained, opening a spreadsheet I'd created while the children did their homework. Not for confrontation purposes, but to ensure we're seeing the complete picture. Mark nodded, his initial anger having settled into focused determination. What are we looking at first? Financial disparities, I replied, pulling up our family banking records. I've been tracking gift values for birthdays and Christmas for the past 3 years. The pattern is illuminating. The spreadsheet revealed what instinct had already suggested. A consistent 3-to-1 ratio in gift value between Melissa's children and ours. Tyler's gifts averaging around $300, while Ethan's hovered near $100. Madison receiving American Girl collections worth hundreds, while Emma received single discount store dolls. This past Christmas was the most dramatic, I noted, highlighting the relevant cells. Tyler received an iPad worth $500 plus accessories. Ethan got a $75 Lego set. Madison received the American Girl collection totaling approximately $450. Emma got a $40 craft kit. Mark studied the numbers, his expression hardening. And we've been supplementing from our own budget to balance things, so the kids wouldn't notice. Exactly. We've been unconsciously compensating for their favoritism for years, I acknowledged. Protecting the children from recognizing the disparity. We moved from financial records to attendance patterns. A calendar I'd maintained primarily for sentimental reasons now revealing a stark reality. My parents had attended 87% of Melissa's children's events over the past 2 years. Recitals, games, school programs. For our children, the attendance rate was 26%, almost exclusively for major milestone events they couldn't reasonably miss without appearing completely uninvolved. I always made excuses, I admitted, scrolling through the calendar entries. They were busy, the timing was difficult, the drive was longer to our events. But looking at it comprehensively, the pattern is undeniable. Mark squeezed my hand. You were trying to protect everyone's feelings. That's who you are. It's who I was. I corrected gently. I'm not sure it's who I need to be anymore. We continued through the evidence categories I'd organized. Photo documentation next. Family albums I'd maintained revealed increasingly obvious visual patterns. Holiday gatherings where Melissa's children were centrally positioned while ours appeared at the edges. Vacation photos showcasing extended time with Tyler and Madison while Ethan and Emma were noticeably absent or minimally included. The annual family portrait tells the whole story, I observed, opening the digital folder containing 5 years of professional family photos. Look at the positioning. Each image showed the same arrangement. My parents centered, Melissa and her family grouped closely with them, while Mark, myself, and our children were consistently positioned as compositional afterthoughts. Not random placement but deliberate, repeated visual hierarchy. And here's where it becomes even clearer, I continued, opening my social media archives. My parents' Facebook and Instagram accounts. While my mother maintained an active social media presence, the content analysis revealed overwhelming disparity. Out of 278 grandchildren-related posts over the past year, 243 featured Melissa's children exclusively. Only 7 focused on Ethan or Emma individually, with the remaining 28 being group shots where all grandchildren appeared. Comments are equally telling, I noted, scrolling through engagement patterns. Multiple responses to every achievement Tyler or Madison posts, regardless of significance. Meanwhile, Ethan's science fair win and Emma's dance recital solo received no acknowledgement despite being directly tagged. As we continued through the evidence compilation, the volume and consistency became undeniable. Not isolated incidents but systematic pattern establishment across multiple dimensions. Beyond quantifiable metrics, the qualitative evidence created equal impact. Text messages, email exchanges, voicemails I'd saved without fully recognizing their significance until now. Listen to this voicemail from 3 months ago, I said, playing the recorded message. My mother's voice emerged from the speaker. Rebecca, we've decided to take Tyler skiing next weekend since he expressed interest in learning. We would have included Ethan, but we know how you feel about extreme sports. No need to call back. Just wanted to let you know in case Melissa mentioned it. Mark's eyebrows rose. Ethan has been begging to learn to ski. We discussed it with your parents at Christmas dinner. Exactly, I confirmed. This isn't forgetting or misunderstanding. It's deliberate exclusion justified through fabricated rationale. The email archives provided similar evidence. Responses to Melissa's requests receiving immediate, enthusiastic engagement while mine lingered unanswered or received delayed, minimal acknowledgement. Family gathering planning consistently prioritizing Melissa's family schedule while treating our availability as secondary consideration. The combined evidence establishes intent, I observed, organizing the documentation into clearly labeled folders. This isn't coincidental preference but systematic favoritism, implemented across multiple dimensions simultaneously. As midnight approached, we had compiled an exhaustive documentation portfolio: financial records, attendance patterns, photographic evidence, communication archives, gift disparity documentation, and social media analysis. Each element individually might be explained away. Together, they created irrefutable pattern confirmation. What do we do with all this? Mark asked, gesturing to the comprehensive evidence compilation. Nothing immediate, I replied thoughtfully. This isn't about confrontation but clarity. Understanding the reality we're dealing with before determining appropriate response. The following morning, while preparing the children's breakfast, I maintained outward normalcy while continuing strategic assessment. Ethan and Emma chatted excitedly about school and weekend plans, blissfully unaware of the family dynamics being methodically documented after their bedtime. Mom, is Grandma going to like my Easter basket? Emma asked, carefully eating her cereal one spoonful at a time, her meticulousness belying my mother's criticism of her behavior. Your basket is beautiful, sweetheart, I assured her, the evidence of last night's documentation still fresh in my mind. Anyone would be lucky to receive something you made with such care. Can I call Grandma and tell her about my project? Ethan asked, his innocent request revealing complete unawareness of his conditional acceptance in his grandparents' affection hierarchy. "How about we finish breakfast first?" I suggested, exchanging a meaningful glance with Mark. "We need to talk about Easter plans anyway." After the children left for school, I continued the evidence compilation with even greater focus. The Easter exclusion had catalyzed recognition, but comprehensive documentation would establish foundation for whatever steps followed. The family photo albums yielded additional insights when examined chronologically. The favoritism pattern establishing immediately after Melissa's first child was born, not gradually developing over time. The predetermined preference suggesting intentional recreation of the dynamic Melissa and I had experienced during our own childhood. Financial records revealed another pattern I hadn't initially recognized. Consistent financial support for Melissa's family beyond gift-giving. Contributions towards summer camps, sports equipment, special lessons, and even vehicle purchases documented through checking. Account records I'd maintained for tax purposes. Your parents paid half the cost of Tyler's soccer training program last year, I noted when Mark called during his lunch break. No equivalent support has ever been offered for Ethan's activities. "Are you sure?" he asked, knowing how methodical I was about financial documentation. "Absolutely. I've tracked every financial interaction since we married. The pattern is comprehensive and one-directional." The evidence compilation continued throughout the day, expanding to include video documentation I hadn't initially considered. Family gathering recordings revealed interaction patterns matching other evidence categories. My parents' engagement with Melissa's children characterized by focused attention, physical affection, and active interest, while interactions with Ethan and Emma demonstrated polite but minimal engagement. Holiday video particularly confirmed the disparity. Christmas morning footage showing extended, enthusiastic response to Tyler and Madison's gift opening, while Ethan and Emma's turns received cursory acknowledgement before attention redirected to their cousins. By afternoon, I had organized the complete evidence portfolio into systematic categories, each documenting a specific dimension of the favoritism pattern. 1. Financial disparity documentation. 2. Event attendance records. 3. Communication pattern analysis. 4. Gift value comparison charts. 5. Interaction quality video compilation. 6. Social media engagement analytics. 7. Support provision documentation. 8. Holiday celebration comparison. The methodical organization transformed emotional impression into factual documentation. Not subjective perception but objective evidence, establishing irrefutable pattern confirmation across multiple independent dimensions. When Mark returned from work, I showed him the completed compilation, organized with the precision that characterized my professional approach to project management. "This is comprehensive," he acknowledged, reviewing the meticulously categorized evidence. "What's our next step?" "Strategic planning," I replied, closing the laptop that contained the digital evidence portfolio. "This documentation establishes what we're dealing with. Now we need to determine appropriate response." As we prepared dinner, maintaining normal routine for the children's benefit, I continued processing potential approaches. Not reactive confrontation but strategic implementation of necessary boundary establishment. "Mom, Grandma called my teacher today," Ethan announced during dinner, his casual statement immediately capturing my full attention. "Your teacher?" I asked carefully, maintaining neutral expression despite internal alarm bells. "Yeah, Mrs. Wilson told me Grandma called to ask about the Easter project I'm making. She wanted to know if it was finished yet." Mark and I exchanged concerned glances, the unexpected contact with our son's teacher representing boundary crossing beyond previous patterns. "Did she say anything else?" Mark asked casually, his tone betraying none of the concern I could read in his expression. "Just that Grandma wanted to know if I needed any special supplies to finish it," Ethan replied, already moving on to telling Emma about playground activities. Later that evening, after confirming with Mrs. Wilson that my mother had indeed called the school, I added this development to the evidence compilation, direct intervention in school activities without parental knowledge or consent representing significant escalation beyond previous boundary issues. They're trying to manage the fallout, Mark observed as we discussed this latest development. Creating documentation of interest in Ethan's activities to counter your confrontation about favoritism. Exactly, I agreed. Which means they recognize the problem but are attempting to manage perception rather than addressing behavior. The evidence trail had grown beyond initial recognition into comprehensive documentation across multiple dimensions: financial, emotional, relational, temporal, and now educational. The pattern establishing not merely preferential treatment, but systematic favoritism implemented with deliberate intention and sustained through conscious decision-making. As I reviewed the complete evidence portfolio one final time before bed, the clarity it provided eliminated any remaining uncertainty about appropriate response. This wasn't occasional thoughtlessness or unconscious bias, but methodical favoritism maintained over years, and now explicitly acknowledged through the Easter exclusion. The documentation process had transformed emotional hurt into strategic comprehension, not merely cataloging injustice, but establishing foundation for systematic response implementation. The evidence trail revealed not only what had happened, but what needed to happen next. My parents and sister had engaged in deliberate favoritism distribution. They were about to discover I could be equally deliberate in response. Dr. Vivian Chen's office provided exactly the professional environment I needed. Clinical rather than coddling. Her approach focused on strategic intervention rather than emotional validation. After reviewing the evidence portfolio I'd compiled, she leaned back in her chair, her expression reflecting professional assessment rather than personal judgment. This documentation establishes clear pattern recognition, she observed, gesturing to the organized folders I'd presented. The systematic nature suggests deliberate implementation rather than unconscious bias. Exactly, I agreed, appreciating her analytical approach. I'm not seeking validation of hurt feelings but strategic guidance regarding appropriate boundary establishment. Dr. Chun nodded approvingly. Most clients in your situation focus exclusively on emotional processing rather than systematic intervention planning. Your approach suggests recognition that sustainable change requires strategic implementation rather than reactive confrontation. We spent the next hour developing comprehensive boundary establishment protocols, communication parameters, engagement guidelines, consequence implementation frameworks. Each element designed not from emotional reaction but strategic necessity. The primary consideration must remain your children's emotional well-being, Dr. Chun emphasized, reviewing our drafted approach. Not retaliation against your parents and sister, but protection of Ethan and Emma from continued psychological impact. Absolutely, I agreed. The objective isn't punishment but pattern interruption and boundary establishment. The strategy we developed balanced multiple considerations, maintaining family connections where appropriate while establishing clear consequence parameters, providing age-appropriate explanations to the children without transferring adult emotional burdens, implementing immediate protection measures while developing long-term relationship recalibration. Document everything, Dr. Chun advised as our session concluded. Boundary violations, communication patterns, implementation outcomes. Creating continued evidence trail ensures accountability maintenance throughout the process. From the therapist's office, I proceeded directly to my next strategic consultation, meeting with Michael Richardson, the financial advisor Mark and I had worked with since marriage. His expertise in family financial structures would provide critical insight regarding potential economic dimensions of the situation. I reviewed the documentation you sent over, Michael began once pleasantries were exchanged. The pattern extends beyond gift disparity into potential inheritance implications. Explain, I requested, having suspected but not confirmed this dimension. Your parents established a family trust 15 years ago, he noted, referencing documents I'd provided from previous financial planning. The structure includes grandchildren provisions with trustee discretion regarding distribution parameters, meaning my parents retain allocation authority, I concluded, seeing the immediate implications. Exactly. Without specific designation requirements, the same favoritism pattern documented in current financial interactions could extend to inheritance distribution. This previously unrecognized dimension added significant complexity to the strategic requirements, protecting Ethan and Emma's future interests while addressing current boundary violations simultaneously. Michael outlined potential approaches, each balancing immediate necessity with long-term implications. Information gathering provides your strongest initial position, he advised. Requesting formal trust documentation establishes both awareness and monitoring without requiring direct confrontation. We developed a comprehensive financial strategy documentation requests regarding trust provisions, establishment of separate education accounts for the children independent from potential grandparent contributions, formal tracking of any financial interactions with family members. Most importantly, Michael emphasized, maintain complete documentation of all communication regarding financial matters. Creating evidence trail establishes both pattern recognition and intervention justification. The financial consultation provided crucial strategic dimension beyond the emotional and psychological considerations, ensuring complete understanding of all relevant factors before implementing system intervention. My next appointment provided another essential perspective. Meeting with Amanda Davidson, Ethan's previous teacher who had witnessed the grandparent dynamics during school functions over multiple years. I noticed the pattern during your parent-teacher conferences, she acknowledged when I explained my documentation project. Your parents attended every meeting for your sister's son but made excuses regarding Ethan's despite their availability being identical. Her observations matched my documentation perfectly. External verification of patterns I'd recognized, but needed objective confirmation to ensure I wasn't perceiving bias where none existed. Amanda's professional education background offered additional strategic guidance regarding the children's protection. The age-appropriate explanation is critical, she advised, drawing from her child development expertise. Children need honest framework without adult emotional complexity, understanding boundaries without absorbing blame or responsibility. She helped craft communication approaches for both children, explaining changes in grandparent interaction without creating loyalty conflicts or emotional burdens. The scripts balanced honesty with protection, ensuring understanding without traumatization. Routine and consistency will be essential, Amanda emphasized, particularly regarding holiday traditions, creating new celebration patterns rather than emphasizing exclusion from previous activities. This guidance catalyzed the next strategic planning phase, development of alternative celebration traditions independent from the established family gathering structure, creating positive replacement rather than simply removing negative experiences. Mark and I spent that evening researching local Easter activities unconnected to family traditions, community egg hunts, children's museum special events, nature center programming, building excitement about new experiences rather than dwelling on grandparent exclusion. What about the extended family dimension? Mark asked as we developed the replacement activity framework. Your Aunt Sarah has always been more balanced in her treatment of all the children. His observation highlighted another strategic consideration, maintaining connections with supportive family members while implementing boundaries with those demonstrating harmful patterns. I added this dimension to our planning document, identifying potential allies within the extended family structure. By morning, the strategic framework had developed across multiple dimensions simultaneously: psychological boundary establishment, financial protection implementation, educational support structures, celebration alternative development, extended family alliance cultivation. The next step required formal communication planning, determining appropriate messaging, timing, and delivery methods for each aspect of the intervention strategy. The initial communication should establish clear position without emotional escalation, I noted during breakfast planning discussion with Mark. Factual presentation of boundary requirements rather than accusatory confrontation. We drafted the key message components while the children prepared for school statements focused on behavior patterns and consequences, rather than emotional impact, expectations regarding future interactions rather than past grievances, protection priorities rather than punishment objectives. The communication strategy included multiple dimensions: formal email to parents and sister establishing new boundary parameters, individual messages to supportive extended family members explaining the situation objectively, age-appropriate conversations with the children regarding upcoming changes. What about the inheritance question? Mark asked as we finalized the communication plan. That's potentially the most consequential long-term. Information gathering first, I decided, applying Michael's strategic advice. Formal requests for trust documentation before determining specific intervention approach. The planning continued throughout the day, each element refined through careful consideration rather than emotional reaction. By evening, the comprehensive strategic framework had solidified across all relevant dimensions. My Aunt Sarah called unexpectedly that evening, the timing suggesting information had already begun circulating through family channels. "Rebecca, your mother mentioned something about Easter plans changing," she began carefully. "I wanted to check if everything was all right." Her tone suggested genuine concern rather than information gathering for my mother, her history of balanced treatment toward all grandchildren establishing credibility independent from the primary family conflict. "There's been a situation," I acknowledged, maintaining factual presentation without emotional elaboration. "My parents explicitly stated they prefer Melissa's children and requested that mine not attend Easter celebration." Sarah's sharp intake of breath confirmed her genuine surprise. That's unacceptable," she stated after a moment. "Have they always been this explicit about the favoritism?" "The statement was new," I explained. "The behavior pattern has been consistent for years." Our conversation provided unexpected strategic advantage, Sarah's position as my mother's sister creating potential influence channel beyond direct confrontation. Her immediate, unequivocal support establishing alliance, I hadn't anticipated during initial strategy development. "What are you planning?" she asked directly, her practical nature matching my own. "Appropriate boundary establishment," I replied, maintaining discretion regarding specific strategic elements while confirming general approach direction. "Good," she stated firmly. "It's long overdue. And Rebecca, the children deserve better than conditional love, based on performance or preference." This unexpected alliance offered significant strategic advantage, internal family influence beyond my direct intervention capabilities. I added this dimension to our implementation framework, recognizing the potential for system change support from within the existing family structure. The final strategic element addressed practical Easter celebration planning, creation of new traditions specifically designed around Ethan and Emma's interests, rather than replacement of previous family activities. Focusing on positive experience development rather than absence remediation. "We've reserved this special Easter brunch at Wildflower Garden," I told the children during dinner. "They have a spectacular egg hunt with different age sections, and your names are already on the registration list." Their excitement about the new plans provided confirmation that our approach was appropriately balanced, addressing the boundary necessity without transferring adult conflict awareness to the children, creating positive alternative rather than emphasizing exclusion or rejection. The comprehensive strategic framework now addressed all essential dimensions. 1. Psychological boundary establishment through clearly defined interaction parameters. 2. Financial protection implementation including trust documentation requests. 3. Communication strategy development with appropriate messaging for each recipient. 4. Alternative celebration tradition establishment centered on children's interests. 5. Extended family alliance cultivation with supportive relationship maintenance. 6. Age-appropriate explanation development balancing honesty with protection. 7. Documentation continuation ensuring accountability throughout implementation, each element carefully calibrated to address both immediate necessity and long-term implications, focusing on protection rather than retribution, boundary establishment rather than relationship termination. "Are you ready for this?" Mark asked as we finalized the strategic implementation timeline that evening. "Once we initiate the process, the family system will respond, probably not positively. I considered his question carefully, reviewing our comprehensive preparation across all relevant dimensions: the evidence documentation establishing pattern confirmation, the strategic framework addressing all essential considerations, the implementation plan balance between necessity and practicality. Yes, I replied with quiet certainty. This isn't emotional reaction but necessary intervention. Protecting our children requires system change initiation, regardless of resulting disruption. The following morning, I implemented the first formal strategic element, sending the carefully drafted email to my parents and Melissa simultaneously, establishing clear boundary parameters while maintaining composed delivery. After careful consideration regarding recent interactions, particularly the explicit statement that you enjoy Melissa's children more, and the Easter exclusion request, we have determined that some fundamental changes are necessary in our family interaction patterns. Effective immediately. 1. All interaction with Ethan and Emma will be based on equal treatment principles. Demonstrated favoritism will result in immediate visit conclusion. 2. Financial gifts must maintain equivalent value across all grandchildren. Disparities will result in items being returned. 3. Event attendance must demonstrate balanced priority rather than preferential selection. These boundaries are non-negotiable requirements for continued family interaction. They reflect necessary protection measures rather than punitive response. Additionally, we request formal documentation regarding the family trust established 15 years ago, specifically the grandchildren provision parameters. Our family will not be attending Easter celebration this year. We have established alternative traditions better aligned with our values regarding equal treatment and unconditional acceptance. Rebecca, the email sent, I turned my attention to the next implementation phase, preparing the children for potential system disruption while maintaining their emotional security. The age-appropriate explanations we developed with Amanda's guidance ready for delivery as needed rather than preemptively. My phone remained silent throughout the morning, the absence of immediate response suggesting strategic assessment rather than reactive engagement from my parents and sister. The expected explosion temporarily delayed while they processed the unexpected boundary establishment from someone they'd always expected to accommodate their preferences without question. By afternoon, the strategic framework had been fully activated across all plan dimensions: communication delivered, alternative plans confirmed, support systems engaged, documentation processes established. The foundation prepared for whatever response emerged from the initial boundary implementation. The family system that had operated unchallenged for years was about to experience fundamental recalibration. My parents and sister had maintained their favoritism pattern through my continued accommodation. They were about to discover I could be equally systematic in implementing necessary change. The response arrived precisely 8 hours after my boundary establishing email. Not from my mother but my father, his message tersely formal in a way that confirmed the family system's destabilization. Rebecca, your mother is quite upset by your email. There seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding Easter arrangements and general family dynamics. We should discuss this directly rather than through such formal communication. As for the trust documentation request, that seems entirely unnecessary given our family relationship. Those arrangements were made with everyone's best interests in mind. Dad, the calculated deflection attempt was precisely what Dr. Chun had predicted: minimization, misunderstanding, communication method critique, rather than content engagement, and resistance to financial transparency. All predictable system maintenance mechanisms when established patterns face challenge. I forwarded the response to Michael with a brief note: trust documentation resistance suggesting potential disparity concerns confirmed. Please initiate formal requests through appropriate channels. His reply came within minutes. On it. Financial institution inquiry initiated. Trust officer contact established. The strategic advantage of professional intervention actions proceeding through established protocols rather than family emotional manipulation channels. The system that had operated through informal control mechanisms now facing formal structural engagement. My mother's response arrived minutes later, emotion-laden subject line, "What is happening?" signaling the expected defensive escalation. "Rebecca, I'm absolutely devastated by your email. How could you possibly think we don't love all our grandchildren equally? This formal list of demands is completely unlike you." Melissa is in tears. "Is this really coming from you or is Mark behind this? We need to talk immediately. This situation has gotten completely out of hand over a simple Easter arrangement suggestion. Mom, the predictable components all present. Emotional escalation, devastated, reality denial, love all our grandchildren equally, blame deflection, is Mark behind this, and minimization, simple Easter arrangement suggestion." The established family script perfectly maintained despite irrefutable pattern documentation. Instead of engaging directly, I implemented the next strategic phase, forwarding the comprehensive evidence portfolio to 3 key extended family members: Aunt Sarah, Uncle Robert, and Cousin Jennifer, each carefully selected for their potential influence, historical fairness, and independent position within the family system. The accompanying message maintained factual presentation without emotional appeal. I'm sharing this documentation to provide context for family system adjustments you may become aware of. The evidence compilation demonstrates a consistent pattern requiring protective boundary establishment for my children's well-being. I welcome your questions but am not seeking intervention in what must remain a direct parent-child matter. Information distribution establishing preventive counter-narrative before my parents and Melissa could control extended family messaging. Strategic alliance cultivation without emotional triangulation or loyalty demands. Aunt Sarah's response came first: brief but unequivocal support. Documentation received and reviewed. Position understood and supported. Available if needed but will respect direct handling parameters. Her concise, clear alliance establishment providing silent reinforcement rather than dramatic intervention. Exactly the measured support most strategically beneficial. By evening, my father had shifted approach, his message attempting financial leverage. "Rebecca, your mother and I have been discussing summer camp options for all the grandchildren. We were planning to cover Tyler and Madison's specialized programs and had similar plans for Ethan and Emma. These arrangements become complicated if we're operating under such formalized terms. The thinly veiled financial threat conforming perfectly to the established pattern. Using resources as control mechanism rather than genuine support expression. The implicit message that boundary establishment would result in resource withdrawal for my children while benefiting Melissa's. I forwarded this message to Michael with a single note. Documentation for financial manipulation pattern continuation. Please expedite trust inquiry. His response confirmed strategic advantage. Perfect timing. Trust officer already engaged based on initial inquiry. This provides additional justification for full disclosure request. Meanwhile, the children's alternative Easter preparations continued developing. Special outfits purchased, restaurant brunch reservation confirmed, community egg hunt registration completed. The positive anticipation building naturally through genuine enthusiasm rather than obligation performance. "Will Grandma and Grandpa be at the garden for Easter?" Emma asked while trying on her new dress, the innocent question demonstrating her unawareness of the family system disruption. "Not this year, sweetheart," I explained using our prepared age-appropriate response. "We're starting a special new tradition just for our family." Her easy acceptance confirmed children's natural adaptability when presented with positive alternatives rather than negative explanations. Ethan showed similar enthusiasm about the new plans, his excitement about the age-categorized egg hunt replacing any disappointment about missed family gathering. 3 days after my initial boundary-establishing email, the first significant system crack appeared. A message from my mother bypassing previous emotional manipulation attempts for direct negotiation. "Rebecca, your father and I have discussed your concerns. We recognize there may have been some imbalance in our attention distribution. Perhaps we can discuss modifications to Easter arrangements that would include all grandchildren?" The partial acknowledgement representing the first strategic victory. System disruption sufficient to initiate recalibration consideration. Not genuine accountability but recognition that previous pattern maintenance was no longer viable without consequence. I maintained strategic discipline, responding with measured engagement. Thank you for acknowledging the pattern. We've already established alternative Easter plans that better meet our family's needs. I remain open to future gathering discussions following demonstrated behavior adjustment and trust documentation provision. The first direct confrontation phase successfully navigated, boundary establishment maintained without emotional escalation or premature reconciliation acceptance. The strategic framework proceeding precisely as designed across all implementation dimensions. Michael's update arrived that afternoon. Trust documentation request formally submitted through appropriate financial channels, requiring response regardless of family relationship manipulation attempts. The professional intervention establishing accountability mechanism beyond emotional control parameters. By week's end, the family system transformation was unmistakably initiated. My parents shifting from denial to negotiation, Melissa isolated from her usual alliance support, extended family members quietly repositioning based on evidence review rather than emotional appeals. The strategic first move had achieved its core objectives: boundary establishment, documentation distribution, alliance cultivation, and system disruption. The family dynamics that had operated unchallenged for years now facing fundamental recalibration necessity through calculated intervention rather than emotional confrontation. My parents had expected immediate capitulation or emotional escalation, either outcome maintaining their system control. Instead, they encountered strategic implementation beyond their established response parameters. The power shift had begun. The week before Easter brought the extended family response phase. I had anticipated reactions crystallizing into clear alliance patterns as information disseminated beyond the immediate family circle. The evidence portfolio distribution generating system-wide recognition impossible to dismiss through the usual narrative management techniques. Aunt Sarah called first, her matter-of-fact approach reflecting her corporate executive background. "I've spoken with your mother," she began without preamble. She attempted the usual emotional deflection until I mentioned reviewing your evidence compilation. The conversation shifted dramatically after that acknowledgement. "How so?" I asked, maintaining factual exchange rather than emotional engagement. She abandoned denial for justification, claiming Melissa's children need more support and are more receptive to guidance. When I pointed out the documented financial disparities, she became defensive about having to explain private family decisions. This information confirmed successful narrative disruption. My mother's established deflection techniques failing against documented evidence and neutral third-party assessment. The system maintenance mechanisms proving ineffective when confronted with factual reality, outside manipulation parameters. Uncle Robert's email arrived next. His assessment reflecting his psychology background. "Rebecca, having reviewed your documentation, I recognize patterns consistent with multi-generational favoritism replication. Your mother experienced similar differential treatment from her own parents, with your Aunt Sarah designated as the difficult child, while your mother was positioned as the compliant favorite. She appears to be unconsciously recreating this dynamic with you and Melissa. This doesn't excuse the behavior, but may explain the resistance to pattern recognition. I've initiated direct discussion with your father, who seems more receptive to objective assessment than your mother currently demonstrates. This unexpected historical context provided additional strategic advantage, pattern recognition extending beyond current circumstances to generational repetition. The system dynamics deeper than individual preference, suggesting established psychological frameworks requiring addressed at fundamental levels rather than surface behavior modification. Melissa's response strategy evolved from wounded innocence to defensive aggression. Her message to extended family members, forwarded by 3 separate relatives, revealing her position destabilization. "I'm sure you've all heard about Rebecca's dramatic Easter boycott and accusations against our parents. She's always been jealous of my relationship with Mom and Dad, and now she's trying to force some kind of equality by threatening to keep the children away unless she gets financial documentation and special treatment. My kids are heartbroken about their cousins missing Easter, but Rebecca refuses any compromise. Please understand this situation isn't what's being presented in her elaborate spreadsheets and charts. The transparent narrative manipulation attempt reflecting increasing desperation, as traditional family alignment patterns failed to maintain previous advantage. Her characterization so dramatically contradicting the documented evidence that it further diminished her credibility, rather than building sympathy alliance. Most significant was the unexpected message from Tyler, Melissa's 12-year-old son, sent directly to Ethan. "Hey, are you really not coming for Easter? Mom says it's because your parents are mad at Grandma and Grandpa. That doesn't make sense. You're way better at the egg hunt than I am. It won't be fun without you." The innocent communication revealing critical information, the children entirely unaware of the preferential treatment pattern, the dynamics invisible to those receiving advantage, just as they had been partially obscured to those experiencing disadvantage. The narrative maintained entirely through adult manipulation, rather than conscious child participation. I shared this insight with Mark that evening, after the children were asleep. The cousins' relationship remains uncomplicated by the adult dynamics, I noted. That's worth preserving despite the necessary boundary implementation with my parents and sister. He nodded thoughtfully. We need to distinguish between the different relationship categories. Protecting our children from grandparent favoritism doesn't necessarily require cousin connection disruption. This realization prompted strategic refinement, boundary establishment with pattern demonstrating adults, while maintaining appropriate child relationship continuity. Protection without unnecessary connection severing, creating sustainable long-term family reconfiguration beyond immediate confrontation requirements. The family divide crystallized further through my father's unexpected office visit. His arrival unannounced, but his demeanor suggesting recognition of negotiation necessity rather than authority assertion. "This situation has gone far enough," he began, declining the offered coffee. "Your mother is devastated, Melissa feels attacked, and now extended family members are involving themselves in private matters." I maintained composed engagement without defensive positioning. "The documentation speaks for itself, Dad. This isn't emotional interpretation but factual pattern demonstration." His expression shifted from authoritative to contemplative, the first genuine engagement rather than dismissal. "Some of your evidence points are taken out of context. The financial support differences reflect different needs and situations. The pattern applies consistently across multiple dimensions," I countered calmly. "Not just financial support but attendance priorities, emotional engagement quality, communication patterns, and explicit preference statements." What followed was the first authentic exchange since boundary implementation, my father actually reviewing selected evidence examples I presented. His reflexive dismissal gradually replaced by reluctant recognition. "We never intended harmful differentiation," he finally offered, his defensive posture physically relaxing. "Your sister has always required more support, more reassurance." It became a habitual response pattern. "Intent doesn't mitigate impact," I replied evenly, "especially regarding children who internalize worth measurement through treatment observation." His thoughtful nod represented significant system disruption, the first genuine acknowledgement beyond deflection or justification. Not complete accountability but foundational recognition necessary for potential pattern interruption. "The trust documentation request seems excessive," he noted, returning to resistant positioning. "That was established for eventual distribution, not immediate scrutiny. Transparency eliminates concern," I countered simply. "Resistance intensifies it." As he departed, his parting statement revealed meaningful perspective shift. "I'll discuss everything with your mother again. The Easter situation was handled poorly, regardless of other considerations." Meanwhile, the extended family division continued crystallizing along predictable lines, those with direct observation of the favoritism pattern confirming its reality, those with limited interaction defaulting to traditional parent authority alignment, and a significant middle group suspending judgment while gathering additional information. Most surprising was cousin Jennifer's direct confrontation with my mother at a family dinner I didn't attend. Her message afterward describing the interaction. I asked Aunt Ellen directly about telling you your children weren't welcome at Easter while Melissa's were. She first denied saying it, then claimed it was about managing personalities, then finally admitted she finds Melissa's children easier to enjoy. When I asked if she realized how that impacts the excluded grandchildren, she actually said, "Children are resilient, they'll be fine." I'm frankly shocked. The favoritism was always visible at family gatherings, but hearing the explicit confirmation and dismissal of impact was disturbing. This independent verification provided crucial validation beyond my direct documentation. External observation confirming pattern reality, rather than emotional misinterpretation. The system transparency increasing as multiple family members recognized previously normalized dynamics as fundamentally problematic. By the day before Easter, the family had divided into clear alliance configurations. 1. Direct support. Aunt Sarah, Uncle Robert, Cousin Jennifer, and surprisingly, my father's brother Thomas, actively acknowledging the pattern and supporting boundary establishment. 2. Defensive alignment. My mother Melissa, her husband Greg, and 2 maternal aunts, maintaining justification while attempting narrative management. 3. Information gathering. Remaining extended family, suspending judgment while observing developing dynamics. My father occupied increasingly isolated middle position, recognizing pattern validity while struggling with implementation implications, privately engaging while publicly maintaining family unity appearance. His discomfort with this transitional positioning creating additional system pressure toward resolution, rather than continued avoidance. The children remained largely protected from the adult dynamics, Ethan and Emma excited about our alternative Easter plans. Occasional cousin communication maintained through supervised channels, age-appropriate explanations provided only as directly necessary. We're creating healthier patterns, Mark observed as we finalized Easter celebration preparations. Not just regarding your parents but modeling appropriate boundary establishment for our children's future relationship frameworks. The strategic discipline throughout implementation had created sustainable system disruption without unnecessary relationship destruction. Addressing pattern problems while preserving viable connections, establishing accountability requirements while maintaining reconciliation possibility through demonstrated behavior change. Why parents had maintained their favoritism system through manipulation techniques, rendered ineffective by evidence documentation and strategic alliance cultivation. The power dynamic fundamentally recalibrated through methodical implementation, rather than emotional reactivity. The family divide wasn't the objective, but the necessary transitional phase between dysfunctional pattern maintenance and potential healthy system reconfiguration. Easter would proceed without traditional family gathering, but with newfound clarity impossible to dismiss or manipulate away. Easter Sunday dawned with unexpected sunshine after a week of rain, the symbolic timing mirroring our family's shifting dynamic. The children's excitement about our new traditions provided perfect counterbalance to the underlying adult tensions. Their genuine enthusiasm, confirming we'd created meaningful alternative, rather than mere replacement. Dad, the garden restaurant has chocolate eggs hidden for different age groups. Ethan exclaimed while straightening his tie, his eyes bright with anticipation rather than disappointment about missed family gathering. We arrived at Wildflower Garden precisely as scheduled, the meticulously planned celebration proceeding perfectly, elegant brunch service, age-appropriate egg hunts, garden exploration activities. The children's joy completely undiminished by grandparent absence, their experience enhanced rather than limited by the boundary-necessitated alternative. My phone remained deliberately silent throughout the morning celebration, notifications muted, responses deferred, attention fully present with my immediate family, rather than divided by extended family drama management. The strategic discipline creating space for genuine enjoyment, rather than performance through tension. It wasn't until we returned home that afternoon that I reviewed the accumulated messages, most notably an unexpected formal email from my father with subject line meeting request. Rebecca, Your mother and I have discussed the situation extensively. We recognize a formal conversation is necessary to address the concerns you've raised. Would you be willing to meet Wednesday evening at our home? Melissa will attend as well. The trust documentation you requested will be available for review at that time. Dad, the unprecedented concession regarding trust documentation represented significant system shift. The financial transparency resistance, abandoned in favor of accountability acceptance. The formal meeting request acknowledging legitimate concern rather than dismissing misunderstanding or overreaction, as previously characterized. I consulted with Mark before responding. Our strategic alignment essential throughout the process. Are you ready for direct confrontation? He asked, knowing my preference for documented communication over emotional engagement. It's the necessary next phase, I acknowledged. The established patterns won't truly change without direct accountability discussion. My response maintained measured tone while establishing essential parameters. Dad, we can meet Wednesday at 7 p.m. To ensure productive discussion, I request 1. Children not present, allowing uninhibited conversation. 2. Complete trust documentation available as mentioned. 3. Focus on forward solutions rather than past justifications. I appreciate your willingness to engage directly. Rebecca, the intervening days brought continued extended family response development, alliance patterns solidifying, information channels establishing, narrative control shifting dramatically from traditional authority figures to evidence-based reality recognition. The system transformation accelerating beyond individual relationship adjustments to fundamental dynamic recalibration. Most significant was Tyler's continued direct communication with Ethan, their cousin relationship maintaining innocent connection despite adult conflict, their interaction providing valuable insight into Melissa's household narrative. Mom was really mad after Easter. She and Grandma were on the phone forever. Something about Aunt Rebecca causing problems about money. Is everything okay with your family? This unfiltered information confirming the ongoing narrative manipulation attempts while revealing their increasing ineffectiveness. The financial focus suggesting desperation, rather than substantive counterargument to the documented favoritism evidence. Wednesday evening arrived with strategic preparation complete. Evidence portfolio organized for reference if needed. Key talking points established. Emotional regulation techniques reviewed. Mark and I arrived precisely on time, presenting unified partnership rather than individual confrontation. The living room had been formally arranged, chairs positioned in conversation grouping, coffee service prepared, documentation folder conspicuously placed on the side table. My parents sat together on the sofa, their body language revealing tension beneath attempted composure. Melissa occupied an adjacent armchair, her defensive posture immediately apparent at my father initiated the discussion with unexpected directness. Rebecca, we've reviewed your documentation and discussed the concerns you've raised. While we see some points differently, we recognize there have been inequities in our approach to the grandchildren. This opening acknowledgement, limited but present, represented significant departure from previous dismissal tactics. The implicit pattern recognition creating foundation for potential authentic engagement, rather than continued denial. My mother's response proved less evolved. I still think this entire situation has been dramatically overblown. Family relationships can't be reduced to spreadsheets and calculations. The documentation simply organized observable patterns, I replied evenly. The consistency across multiple dimensions establishes intent rather than coincidence. Melissa interjected with practiced victim positioning. My children are being punished for being easier to manage. They shouldn't suffer because yours require more supervision. The calculated provocation attempt meeting strategic non-engagement, her statement allowed to stand without defensive response, its transparent manipulation evident without requiring counter-argument. Instead, I redirected to substantive discussion. The trust documentation indicates significantly disparate allocation parameters, I noted, reviewing the materials my father had provided. Tyler and Madison designated for educational funding triple the amount established for Ethan and Emma. My father shifted uncomfortably. The allocations were based on projected needs assessment at establishment time. They can be adjusted. That's precisely my point, I responded calmly. Subjective needs assessment consistently favors Melissa's children across all support dimensions. The pattern requires systemic correction rather than individual instance justification. The confrontation proceeded with remarkable restraint across all participants, my strategic discipline maintaining factual focus despite Melissa's repeated emotional escalation attempts, my parents gradually abandoning defensive positioning for reluctant acknowledgement as specific evidence points proved irrefutable. The turning point came through my mother's unexpected emotional revelation. "I never wanted you to feel less loved," she admitted, her controlled facade finally cracking. "Melissa simply needed more attention, more support. She always has." It became a habitual response pattern without conscious favoritism intent. Intent doesn't mitigate impact. I repeated my earlier observation to my father, especially for children who measure their worth through observed treatment patterns. My mother's momentary vulnerability quickly retreated behind familiar justification. "Your children have you and Mark. You're capable, independent, successful. Melissa's family needs more support. Grandparent love shouldn't be distributed based on parental capability assessment," I countered. "Each child deserves equal acceptance regardless of parent dynamics." The discussion continued with remarkable civilization despite underlying tensions. Specific incidents addressed, pattern recognition established, potential adjustment parameters identified. The confrontation achieving primary objective of bringing previously unacknowledged dynamics into explicit discussion rather than continued shadow operation. Melissa's participation progressively devolved from defensive positioning to transparent manipulation attempts to finally sullen withdrawal, as her usual emotional leverage techniques proved ineffective against documented evidence and strategic non-engagement. After nearly 2 hours of substantive discussion, I presented the necessary conclusion framework. Moving forward requires several clear adjustments. 1. Equal financial support patterns across all grandchildren. 2. Balanced attention distribution during family gatherings. 3. Equivalent gift value standardization for all occasions. 4. Trust allocation equalization through formal amendment. 5. Explicit acknowledgement of previous disparities to affected parties. My father nodded thoughtfully. These seem reasonable expectations for healthy family functioning. My mother and Melissa exchanged concerned glances, clearly recognizing the system advantage dissolution these requirements represented. The financial and emotional currency previously distributed preferentially, now subject to explicit equity requirements beyond manipulation capability. "And if we find these terms excessive?" my mother asked, attempting authority reassertion through the question. "Then our current limited contact arrangement continues indefinitely," I replied with calm finality. Boundary requirements aren't negotiable when they protect children's emotional well-being. The power dynamic shift was unmistakable, parental authority replaced by evidence-based accountability, preferential positioning dissolved through transparent requirement establishment, manipulation techniques rendered ineffective through strategic implementation. As the meeting concluded, my father provided the trust amendment documentation he'd prepared in advance: formal financial equalization between all grandchildren, standardized distribution parameters, transparent allocation requirements. The concrete action demonstrating genuine adjustment intent beyond verbal acknowledgement. "We would like to rebuild the relationship with Ethan and Emma," he stated as we prepared to leave. "Whatever parameters you determine appropriate." This unprecedented positioning, grandparent access recognized as privilege rather than entitlement, represented the most significant system transformation. The fundamental power recalibration acknowledging parental authority rather than presuming grandparent prerogative. Mark and I departed with composed satisfaction rather than emotional triumph. The confrontation achieving strategic objectives through disciplined implementation rather than reactive escalation. The system disruption catalyzing potential reconstruction on healthier foundation than previous dysfunction maintenance. Driving home, Mark observed the essential outcome. They finally understand you won't accommodate harmful patterns regardless of family relationship expectations. More importantly, I added, they recognize our children deserve equal treatment, regardless of subjective preference or relationship dynamics. The confrontation had established necessary accountability without destructive conflict escalation, addressing dysfunctional patterns while preserving potential relationship rehabilitation through demonstrated behavior change rather than merely verbal commitment. My parents had maintained their favoritism system through unquestioned authority and emotional manipulation. They now understood both were insufficient against evidence-based boundary establishment and strategic implementation discipline. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted through confrontation success, and with it, the possibility for genuine family system transformation. The weeks following our confrontation brought careful system recalibration, rather than immediate resolution. Behavior patterns established over years requiring consistent accountability maintenance, rather than single-event transformation. My parents' adjustment attempts reflecting varying degrees of genuine change versus performance compliance, their historical dynamics influencing adaptation capability. My father implemented concrete changes most effectively: trust documentation formally amended with legal verification, financial support patterns standardized across all grandchildren, communication approach noticeably adjusted toward balanced interest expression. His pragmatic nature facilitating behavior modification, once pattern recognition, established implementation requirements. The summer camp registrations have been processed, he reported during a brief phone conversation. Equal funding allocation for all 4 children as discussed. I acknowledged the adjustment with measured appreciation. Thank you. That represents appropriate grandparent support distribution. His momentary pause suggested recognition that my response reflected acknowledgement rather than gratitude. Appropriate behavior no longer receiving disproportionate recognition, normalized expectations replacing previous accommodation patterns. My mother's adaptation proved more challenging. Lifelong preferential patterns requiring conscious disruption rather than natural adjustment. Her communication attempts oscillating between genuine effort and reflexive reversion to established dynamics. I've purchased identical birthday presents for both Emma and Madison, she announced during her first supervised visit following the confrontation. The exact same dolls in different hair colors. The deliberate equality emphasis revealing both understanding of requirements and subtle resistance to internalization. Compliance performance rather than genuine perspective transformation. The specific equality demonstration suggesting scorekeeping mentality rather than natural balanced affection expression. Nevertheless, behavioral compliance created protected interaction experience for the children regardless of motivational authenticity. Their experience priority superseding adult intention assessment in immediate implementation phase. Melissa's response followed predictable resistance trajectory. Initial withdrawal from family interactions, attempted alliance cultivation with sympathetic relatives, narrative manipulation through selective information presentation. Her established advantage dissolution creating adjustment resistance proportional to previous benefit level. Your sister feels punished for having more compliant children, my mother reported during one of her tentative relationship rebuilding conversations. She believes this entire situation reflects your jealousy, rather than legitimate concern. Melissa's perspective remains secondary to pattern correction necessity, I replied simply. Her interpretation doesn't alter documented behavior reality, or required adjustment implementation. Most significant was the children's response to the recalibrated family dynamics, Ethan and Emma demonstrating noticeable confidence development during supervised grandparent interactions, their natural personalities emerging more fully within protected environment parameters. The equalization creating space for authentic engagement rather than performance anxiety. Grandpa watched my whole soccer game, Ethan reported with genuine surprise after my father's first independent outing with him. He didn't look at his phone once and he remembered all my teammates' names. This simple observation confirming both previous engagement deficiency and current adjustment effectiveness, the behavioral change directly improving grandparent-grandchild relationship quality through authentic attention rather than divided engagement, extended family dynamics evolved with remarkable efficacy. Previously silent witnesses to favoritism pattern now actively supporting equalization implementation, accountability maintained through multiple observation channels rather than single. Source monitoring. The system transparency preventing reversion through isolation tactic deployment. Your mother actually asked about Emma's dance recital, Aunt Sarah reported during one of our regular check-in conversations. Specific details rather than generic inquiry. She's making genuine effort despite obvious adjustment difficulty. This external verification providing important progress assessment beyond personal observation, objective confirmation of behavioral change, rather than performance compliance during direct monitoring periods. Trust amendment implementation proceeded through formal financial channels, documentation verification confirming equalization parameters, distribution schedules standardized for all grandchildren, transparency mechanisms established for ongoing account management. The structural changes creating accountability framework, extending beyond relationship dynamics to concrete resource allocation. Most revealing was Tyler and Madison's response to the recalibrated attention patterns. Their initial confusion regarding shared spotlight expectations, evolving into more balanced interaction capability. The preferential treatment pattern apparently creating developmental limitations for recipients as well as excluded parties, though through different mechanism pathways. Tyler seems genuinely excited about including Ethan in activities now, Mark observed after the first post-confrontation cousin interaction. Less competition anxiety, more collaborative engagement. The system recalibration benefiting all children through healthier interaction pattern establishment, both previously preferred and previously disadvantaged children, developing more authentic relationship dynamics through equalization implementation. By summer vacation, the family system had established functional adjustment parameters, supervised interaction proceeding with appropriate behavior compliance, financial support distributed with verified equity, communication patterns maintained with consistent accountability. The transformation imperfect but sufficient for protected relationship continuation. Melissa's resistance gradually diminished through isolation ineffectiveness, her previous alliance advantages dissolving through transparency implementation, her narrative manipulation attempts unsuccessful against documented evidence accessibility. The system recalibration eliminating manipulation effectiveness, rather than requiring active counteraction deployment. Most significant was the unexpected growth opportunity for all participants, children experiencing healthier boundary demonstration, parents practicing appropriate advocacy implementation, grandparents developing more conscious interaction patterns. The necessary confrontation creating development catalysts beyond simple correction implementation. This process has changed everything, Mark reflected during a quiet moment after the children were asleep. Not just their behavior toward our kids, but our own understanding of appropriate boundary maintenance. The observation capturing essential transformation dimension. The strategic response generating growth beyond immediate problem resolution to fundamental relationship recalibration across multiple system levels. The family that emerged from this process functioned through conscious interaction rather than unquestioned pattern perpetuation. The relationships developing authentic connection capability, rather than performance compliance. The boundaries establishing protection without requiring complete disconnection. My parents had maintained their favoritism system through unquestioned authority and pattern normalization. They now understood both were insufficient against evidence-based accountability and strategic boundary implementation. 1 year after the Easter exclusion that catalyzed our family system transformation, we gathered for a holiday celebration that demonstrated the remarkable evolution completed through strategic implementation, rather than emotional confrontation. The physical setting remained familiar. My parents' home decorated for spring festivities, but the relationship dynamics operated through fundamentally recalibrated parameters. My father managed the egg hunt with conspicuous attention balance, clues designed with age-appropriate customization for each child, prize distribution organized with deliberate equity, participation acknowledgement expressed with equivalent enthusiasm. his conscious effort having evolved from performance compliance to habitual implementation through consistent practice. "Ethan, your problem-solving approach was exceptional," he commented with genuine appreciation following the activity. "Emma, your creative interpretation of the riddles showed remarkable imagination. The specific, individualized observations demonstrating authentic engagement, rather than generic platitude expression, qualitative interaction improvement beyond mere equality performance. The relationship development reflecting genuine connection, rather than obligation fulfillment. My mother's adaptation remained more visibly deliberate but consistently maintained, her conscious equality implementation occasionally revealing calculation evidence but never reverting to previous preferential patterns. The effort consistency more significant than perfect naturalization. I've prepared identical Easter baskets," she explained while retrieving them from a storage room. Then added 2 personalized items for each child based on their specific interests. The balanced approach implementing both equality foundation and individual recognition simultaneously. Standardized value with personalized selection demonstrating appropriate adjustment integration. The detailed planning reflecting internalized understanding of required parameters rather than superficial compliance. Most revealing was Melissa's transformed positioning, her previous advantage dissolution necessitating relationship recalibration across all family dimensions. The preferential treatment elimination requiring fundamental interaction, approach modification beyond simple behavior adjustment. "Tyler, please make sure you share the game console time equally," she reminded her son without prompting. "Everyone gets the same turn length." This spontaneous equity reinforcement demonstrating significant perspective transformation. The equalization parameters internalized sufficiently for independent implementation, rather than requiring external monitoring. The most resistant family member demonstrating most meaningful adaptation evidence through voluntary standard application. The children demonstrated the most profound transformation, their interaction quality reflecting liberation from previous hierarchy constraints, their engagement reflecting authentic connection, rather than competition necessity, their relationship development flourishing within protected equality parameters. "Can Emma be on my team for the next game?" Tyler requested during afternoon activities, the genuine inclusion preference replacing previous selective engagement patterns. "She's really good at the memory challenges." Madison similarly demonstrated relationship quality improvement. "Ethan, you should show Grandma your science project pictures. She'd really like the experiment design." These natural interaction adjustments confirming the healthiest system transformation dimension. The next generation liberated from dysfunctional pattern perpetuation through timely intervention implementation. The cousin relationship developing authentic connection, rather than recreating parental competition dynamics. My parents' behavioral transformation extended beyond performance compliance to genuine understanding development. Their occasional private observations revealing perspective evolution, rather than mere action modification. "I never realized how our attention distribution affected the children's relationship with each other," my father acknowledged during a quiet conversation away from the main gathering. "The competition we created through different treatment standards." My mother's reflection demonstrated similar recognition development. "Watching them play together now without the constant positioning for preference. It's how family should function." These unprompted observations confirming internal perspective shift beyond external behavior compliance. The adaptation progressing from conscious implementation to value integration. The transformation developing sustainable foundation, rather than temporary adjustment performance. The trust adjustment implementation had proceeded beyond formal documentation to practical application. Summer educational program funding distributed with verified equality. Activity support provided with transparent standardization, future allocation parameters established with explicit equity requirements. The financial dimension reformation creating structural fairness beyond relationship dynamics. Extended family members who had witnessed the system transformation expressed unprompted observation regarding improved function quality. "This is the healthiest I've seen this family interact," Aunt Sarah commented while observing the children's cooperative play. "The energy is completely different, collaborative rather than competitive." Uncle Robert similarly noted fundamental atmosphere shift. The tension that used to underlie every gathering has been replaced by authentic connection. The boundary establishment created space for genuine relationship rather than performance obligation. Most significant was my own parental confidence development. The advocacy implementation experience creating transferable skill application beyond specific family situation to broader child protection capability. The boundary establishment process strengthening fundamental protection commitment through practical application experience. The evening concluded with dessert served in the dining room, the seating arrangement unconsciously reflecting the relationship recalibration, natural integration, rather than previous hierarchy positioning, comfortable proximity rather than strategic placement, authentic grouping rather than status demonstration. As I observed the transformed family system functioning through its new parameters, the essential recognition crystallized with perfect clarity. The strategic response to explicit favoritism had created more than problem resolution. It had generated fundamental system reformation beyond specific behavior correction to comprehensive relationship recalibration. The documentation that had established accountability foundation now remains securely stored rather than actively referenced. The evidence compilation maintaining potential availability, while current interaction patterns eliminated active deployment necessity. The strategic resource preserved while immediate application requirements diminished through successful implementation. Driving home that evening with tired children sleeping in the back seat, Mark articulated the transformation essence. They actually see Ethan and Emma now as individuals worthy of equal attention and affection, not as extensions of their relationship with you. This observation capturing the essential shift beyond behavior compliance to fundamental perception transformation. The children recognize for inherent value, rather than parental relationship extension. The boundary implementation creating space for authentic connection development, rather than merely correcting external behavior patterns. More importantly, I added, our children understand their worth isn't determined by grandparent preference or comparative evaluation. They expect appropriate treatment as fundamental right rather than special consideration. This value transmission representing the most significant transformation dimension. The next generation developing healthy expectation foundation through boundary demonstration rather than accommodation observation. The pattern interruption creating developmental advantage beyond immediate protection implementation. The family system that emerged from this year-long transformation process operated through conscious implementation rather than unconscious pattern perpetuation. The relationships developed through authentic connection rather than role performance. The boundaries established through explicit communication rather than unspoken accommodation. My parents continued demonstrating adjustment commitment through consistent behavior maintenance. The initial compliance evolving through practice into habitual implementation, approaching natural interaction quality. The transformation process requiring time investment, but generating sustainable result development through persistent application. Melissa's adaptation progressed with surprising effectiveness, her advantage dissolution necessitating fundamental approach recalibration, her children's improved relationship experience providing positive reinforcement for continued implementation. The system adjustment benefiting previous advantage recipient through healthier connection development, despite privilege reduction. Most importantly, the children flourished within the protected environment parameters, their cousin relationship developing authentic connection qualities, their grandparent interactions proceeding with appropriate expectation foundation, their understanding of healthy boundary maintenance establishing through direct observation rather than abstract instruction. The strategic response to explicit favoritism had created more than problem resolution. It had generated comprehensive system transformation benefiting all participants through healthier interaction pattern establishment. The family that had operated through preferential treatment and accommodation requirement now functioned through equitable engagement and boundary respect. The transformation extending beyond behavior modification to fundamental relationship recalibration. The strategic implementation creating sustainable change through systematic approach rather than emotional confrontation.